Have you ever heard of the Tower of Babel? One of the most enigmatic and compelling accounts in the Bible, where power and ambition intersect dramatically with identity, language, and human destiny. Throughout the centuries, kings and peasants, wise men and skeptics, philosophers and theologians have repeated the same haunting questions. Did Babel really exist? Where exactly was it located? What drove humanity to attempt such an audacious reach toward heaven? And why does its catastrophic fall still echo through time as a warning, a symbol, and an enigma we cannot completely decipher? Today, we will meticulously connect the archaeological clues from ancient Mesopotamia to the biblical text to face this profound mystery head-on. The biblical account appears deceptively simple, yet beneath its surface lies extraordinary depth. After the Great Flood, when the waters finally receded and scattered families began to re-establish civilization, humanity still spoke a single, unified language. United not only by words but by shared purposes and collective ambition, they made a momentous decision to build a magnificent city and an unprecedented tower whose top would literally touch the heavens themselves. "Come, let us make a name for ourselves," they declared with determination, "so that we may not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." This was far more than mere construction. It was a project of unprecedented grandeur, of establishing permanent identity, of achieving immortal permanence in human memory. But according to the book of Genesis, when God came down to observe the city and its ambitious tower, he made a decisive intervention. He confused the language of the builders, abruptly interrupting their work and dispersing the peoples across the known world. That place came to be called Babel, meaning confusion, because there the languages multiplied exponentially and humanity's unified routes suddenly divided into countless divergent paths. Behind this seemingly straightforward account exists an entire universe of profound meanings and timeless truths. The tower represents far more than mere brick stacked upon brick. It stands as a powerful symbol of fundamental human desires that have accompanied our species since the dawn of consciousness. The relentless impulse to rise above our circumstances, to surpass seemingly impossible limits, to reach toward heaven using nothing but our own ingenuity and determination. How many times throughout our own personal lives do we find ourselves erecting metaphorical towers? Ambitious projects designed to prove our worth to the world, to establish our significance, to ensure we don't appear insignificant before the vast, intimidating universe. The eternal drama of Babel speaks directly to the perpetual tension between genuine community and destructive vanity, between authentic cooperation and destructive pride, between legitimate human projects and divine purposes that transcend our limited understanding. If we seriously investigate where this monumental story might have actually taken place, every historical map points decisively toward ancient Mesopotamia, that legendary land between rivers, the fertile region blessed and defined by the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what we now call Iraq. Within this cradle of civilization flourished some of history's most grandiose cities, and prominent among them stood Babylon, justly famous throughout the ancient world for its magnificent temples, opulent palaces, legendary hanging gardens, powerful deities, and its almost hypnotic fascination over travelers and merchants from every corner of the known world. In established historical tradition, one particular construction stands out dramatically when we contemplate the possible reality behind Babel. The massive ziggurat of Etemenanke, known reverently as the temple foundation of heaven and earth, dedicated with elaborate ceremony to Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon. Many serious scholars and archaeologists see in this monumental structure a highly plausible model for the tower described in the biblical account. A carefully engineered step structure rising through various levels, built high enough to dominate the entire landscape for miles around and designed specifically to attract the awe and attention of every observer. The ancient Babylonians had genuinely mastered the sophisticated art of manufacturing high-quality bricks fired in carefully controlled ovens, then reinforcing these with bitumen, a naturally occurring asphalt that effectively waterproofed the structure while chemically uniting individual pieces into an incredibly strong whole. This advanced construction technology enabled them to erect structures that were both vast in scope and impressively tall, featuring elaborate ramps and monumental stairways that led worshippers and visitors to sacred sanctuaries positioned strategically at the very top. Let us pause to imagine the overwhelming psychological effect such a structure would have had on anyone approaching this ancient city. Picture a man-made mountain rising dramatically from the flat horizon, appearing like nothing so much as an artificial bridge boldly connecting earth and sky. It becomes remarkably easy to understand why such an impressive tower would simultaneously feed both intense human pride and generate genuine fear that humanity, left without proper limits, might completely forget the essential virtue of humility before their creator. The etymology of Babel itself reveals fascinating layers of meaning that have intrigued scholars for generations. To Hebrew speakers, the word sounded remarkably similar to Balal, meaning to confuse or to mix. However, to the Babylonians themselves, their great city name Babylon derived from Babilu, which translates as the Gate of God, conceptually envisioning their metropolis as a sacred gateway city, a holy passage between the earthly and divine realms. This linguistic irony poses profound questions that resonate deeply with human experience. How many times do the doors we construct with the best intentions eventually become walls that separate rather than connect? How frequently does the spiritual path we design to bring us closer to the divine somehow transform into merely another showcase for exalting our own achievements and feeding our ego? While archaeological evidence cannot provide us with a convenient plaque definitively stating, "Here stood the actual Tower of Babel," extensive excavations and research have revealed a historical and cultural context that proves remarkably coherent with the biblical account. Ancient Babylon definitely possessed a great ziggurat of impressive proportions. Carefully preserved inscriptions from antiquity speak explicitly about the reconstruction of colossal temples. Greek travelers and historians like Herodotus provided detailed descriptions of stepped towers that dominated city skylines, and the overall urban landscape of the Fertile Crescent clearly accommodated these massive brick monuments, constructed specifically to honor various deities while simultaneously impressing peoples from neighboring regions with displays of wealth, power, and architectural sophistication. While none of this archaeological evidence definitively proves the existence of the specific biblical tower, all of it combines to make entirely plausible an ancient collective memory that in some distant time characterized by common language and unified human projects, our ancestors erected something monumentally ambitious that was genuinely intended to reach toward the heights of heaven. And this something subsequently became the enduring symbol of a crucial turning point in the entire trajectory of human history. The true heart of this ancient mystery, however, lies not in construction materials or architectural techniques, but in the profound question of language itself. Why would God choose to confuse human languages? Was this divine intervention primarily punishment for human presumption? Was it protective action to prevent worse consequences? Or was it perhaps a form of divine pedagogy, a teaching moment designed to redirect human development? The biblical text suggests something far more nuanced and compassionate than simple punishment. It implies a loving limitation imposed for humanity's own ultimate benefit. When a single language and a unified project begin primarily serving human pride, enabling forced homogenization, and fostering collective forgetfulness of transcendent reality, then diversity itself returns as a necessary remedy. Different words compel us to slow down our rushed judgments, to negotiate with patience, to listen more carefully to perspectives we might otherwise ignore. Geographic and linguistic dispersion pushes us inevitably toward discovering new territories, developing innovative inventions, creating rich and varied cultures. There's something remarkably paradoxical here. What initially appears to be devastating rupture ultimately carries within it the precious seed of our world's incredible cultural richness and diversity. When we consider languages from a modern scientific perspective, we observe complex linguistic families, massive historical migrations, gradual phonetic and grammatical transformations, and we recognize in this intricate tapestry slow, cumulative processes that often develop independently across different regions and peoples. Theological reflection, meanwhile, contemplates the deeper spiritual meaning. Even if languages follow predictable natural paths of evolution, the Babel narrative offers us an invaluable spiritual portrait of humanity's fundamental relationship with power, with unity, and with difference. These two perspectives, scientific and theological, need not cancel each other out or compete for dominance. One speaks to the how of linguistic development, while the other invites us to reflect seriously on the why of human communication and community. What the ancient account provokes us to ask ourselves is this crucial question. Exactly what type of unity are we working to build in our own time? Are we pursuing a unity that genuinely respects individual dignity and protects freedom? Or are we instead creating a forced unification that systematically erases diverse voices and imposes a single, monolithic vision? It's particularly significant to observe how skillfully the Bible weaves the Babel narrative into its larger tapestry of human history and divine purpose. Before introducing us to Babel, the book of Genesis presents what scholars call the Table of Nations, detailed genealogies showing how various peoples naturally spring from extended families and gradually spread themselves across the earth through normal population growth and migration. After the Babel incident, however, biblical history strategically narrows its focus, choosing to follow a single man named Abraham, through whom God promises that all the families of the earth would ultimately be blessed. The overarching message seems remarkably clear and hopeful. God does not abandon humanity to permanent confusion and division. Instead, he calls individuals, guides them patiently, and begins again from hearts that choose obedience, with the ultimate goal of once again reaching and blessing the full multiplicity of human peoples. Much later in the biblical narrative, we encounter an exciting and profound counterpoint to Babel in the New Testament book of Acts. At the Feast of Pentecost, people representing many different nations and language groups hear the same transformative message proclaimed, but remarkably, each person hears it in his own native language. If at Babel human language fragmented because of collective pride and rebellion, at Pentecost authentic communication becomes beautifully reconciled through the power of divine love and the work of the Holy Spirit. This brings us back to a fundamental question. Why did humanity originally choose to erect this ambitious tower? The answer lies in recognizing that human beings possess a deep, God-given longing for genuine meaning and lasting significance. We naturally want to recognize ourselves in our works, our cities, our lasting legacy to future generations. There's authentic nobility in this desire to work creatively, to build lasting structures, to collaborate on projects larger than any individual could accomplish alone. All of this activity reflects important aspects of our fundamental human vocation and calling. The serious problem emerges, however, when our legitimate desire to make a name for ourselves begins to eclipse our deeper calling to serve others and honor God. When personal glory becomes a substitute for divine glory, when healthy unity deteriorates into enforced uniformity and authentic cooperation transforms into subtle coercion. At that dangerous point, our tower becomes primarily a monument to human ego rather than an altar of gratitude and worship. The very project that was originally intended to make us truly great ultimately ends up dividing us from each other and from our Creator. Consider carefully the metaphorical towers that characterize our 21st century landscape. Massive data centers that concentrate unprecedented amounts of personal information. Sophisticated algorithms that increasingly control what captures our attention and shapes our thinking. Social media platforms that boldly promise connection and unity but consistently deliver polarization and tribal conflict instead. We speak the same digital language across the globe, but how frequently does our online conversation degenerate into mere noise, deliberate disinformation, and hostile tribal warfare? Somehow, the ancient pattern of Babel persistently reappears whenever we seek to reach the top at any cost, whenever we measure human value primarily by reach and influence, whenever we transform shared public spaces into stages for personal vanity and self-promotion. And yet, despite these sobering observations, there remains genuine hope. Confusion and division are not the final word in human history. If the multiplicity of languages and cultures challenges us with complexity and difficulty, it simultaneously enriches us beyond measure. Each human language preserves and guards a unique way of seeing and interpreting the world, a distinctive music and rhythm, a precious wisdom wrapped in sounds and cultural patterns found nowhere else. Each people group brings to the human family an irreplaceable set of practices, stories, traditional knowledge, spiritual insights, and accumulated wisdom that expands and enriches what it means to be human. The path forward is not to tear down differences in order to construct a single, uniform tower. Rather, our calling is to learn the patient arts of translation, deep listening, and authentic cooperation that doesn't annul diversity. We're called to build cities and communities where plurality is not perceived as a threat to be eliminated, but as invaluable cultural patrimony to be celebrated and protected. The Tower of Babel story continues to reach across millennia to speak directly to us because it addresses universal aspects of human nature and experience. It speaks to our deep desire to belong somewhere, to be remembered after we're gone, to transcend the apparent limitations of our mortality. Simultaneously, it warns us about the genuine risk of losing ourselves completely in the intoxicating climb toward worldly success and recognition. If we want our works and influence to truly remain and benefit others, perhaps we need to learn to exchange hasty ambition for patient wisdom, impressive height for deep foundations, self-serving glory for genuine service to the common good. In the end, Babel remains beautifully open as a mystery that invites multiple levels of interpretation. Was it a specific historical event that we can locate in time and space? Was it primarily spiritual metaphor designed to teach timeless truths? Or was it ancient memory carefully converted into teaching narrative for future generations? Perhaps the most honest answer is that it was somehow all of these simultaneously. What remains absolutely essential is that Babel's central message continues to ring with crystal clarity across the centuries. There can be no authentic heaven without genuine humility, no lasting unity without fundamental truthfulness, no meaningful language without the foundation of love. The confusion of languages was definitely not the end point of human history. It was rather a pedagogical pause, a necessary detour designed so that we could eventually rediscover true communion, not through the forced imposition of a single voice, but through the beautiful harmony that emerges when many diverse voices learn to sing together. Subscribe and activate notifications to follow each new discovery as we continue exploring these ancient mysteries. May this ancient story kindle in each of us a fresh, personal question. Exactly what kind of work do I want to erect and leave behind with my life? If our life's work is constructed from truth, justice, and love, it won't need to physically touch the sky in order to achieve true immortality. Because ultimately, what makes human beings truly great is not the impressive height of our towers, but the depth and integrity of our foundations.